Mark Brown. Mark, it's great you're living in the neighborhood now. What possessed you to move into our neighborhood?
It's
your neighborhood.
It's a great place to live. You know, it's a real community. I've been out in the suburbs for a while. I've gotten rid of my suburban guilt. I'm back.
I think the last time you were on the show, I said you ought to move back to Chicago. Well, I'm glad you did.
I must have listened to you.
So what is going on? Let's talk a little bit about your take on the peaceful transition of power and the ceremonies, et cetera, and the counting of the number of people in attendance. What's your take on what's going on here with our country today?
Well, were you meaning the inauguration?
You want to
at this very hour?
it?
At this very hour, our country is detaining refugees arriving at American airports and sending them back to countries
where they will get killed,
where they haven't been living because they're refugees. I don't know. I'm very discouraged about the state of our country today.
No, it's quite something else. It's
one of the reasons we asked you on this week was a wonderful column you had on the Women's March. You've attended a lot of marches over the years. You're primarily focused on local politics and issues, but you've been around the block a few times and pay attention outside Chicago. Was there something different about last weekend that gave you pause to write about another march?
Well, I just simply wanted to give them whatever little help that my column would give, just that much more exposure. Obviously, they were doing quite well on their own through social media, but the big media, the old media, still can help generate some numbers, and I want there to be a resistance to this president. I want it to be a peaceful resistance, Mike. But I want it to be I want it to be strong, and the fact that there were some people out there putting something together. The women's these were totally volunteers. This was, they hooked up with some big groups, and I'm sure they certainly got some technical support, but just grassroots people coming together. You always like to see that. There was an interesting story in the New York Times yesterday. I read that, do the size of these marches matter anymore? Because it's so much. Apparently, it's easier to put together a march through social media these days. But I still think it does matter. And the more people you get involved, there's a chance that it'll be something that lasts.
Yeah, the size matters in some things. Mark, what other way? I heard your frustration in the description of us turning back refugees at airports today, which I feel exactly the same way about. What do you believe? For a lot of people, it's about looking at the array of horrors and picking battles. As a reporter, what do you go to one, remain somehow above the fray, but also useful in shining the light on the endless list of attacks on liberties and people and the American way of life that are going down right now?
Well, being a columnist, I don't have to be so far above the fray.
Okay, good.
So I can pick up sides.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Really, one of the problems right now is just which battles you pick.
Yes.
And I think that's actually going to be a problem of the people who are opposed to Trump is, do you jump in on everything? Do you need to do that because maybe your issue isn't the other person's issue, but honestly, I'm not as strong probably on environmental issues as I should be, right? And so I'm not as moved on them as I am perhaps on immigration. Mm-hmm. But so, where do we do that?
That's a really good point. You say I'm not, you admit that more important to you is the immigration question rather than the fact that we're, removing science from our lives.
Well, and that we're going to probably end the planet. You know?
So when when something like last Saturday happens, they had 250,000 people in Chicago, more than that in L.A. of all places, and even more than that in D.C. and et cetera. How do you see that people are learning to say, okay, it's not my issue, but I'm going to stand next to you? That kind of thing?
Well, I think for last weekend, I think everybody probably just went out there for their own issue.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And
to feel better.
In that they found joint strength, right?
Bingo.
Now, the next question is, what will happen when it's, we're going one issue at a time? I don't know. I am 62 years old, so
it's about time.
The 60s and I was a little young then, right? And maybe I think a lot of people about my age, maybe didn't participate as much in the protest of that era as maybe we think we should have in retrospect, right? So I think there's a lot of people like that that are going to be motivated to, understood that good was done from protests. But when you,
Amen.
Well, I think you folks know a little about that. I also see when I look back on that stuff, there were a dozen reasons besides the war that were getting people into the streets in those days.
Sure.
And I don't know how all that fits together.
Well, we used to always talk about, if you get someone hip to one issue, say welfare women, that through the course of their involvement, they would see how there were other issues, whether it be housing, police, the economy, et cetera. And people learned and they grew. One of the things that has come out of all this action lately is people talking about local. And so I want to bring it back to local here in Chicago. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the upcoming mayoral race. It's a little ways off, but there was talk about Tom Dart getting involved, and then all of a sudden Chuy Garcia, who has become extremely articulate and really on the target from every time I've heard him speak. He looks like he might run for mayor again. Do you have any insight to this through your pals at the Sun-Times and in the media?
Well, I'm hearing Tom Dart is not going to run. And I guess I should disclose right there that my wife works for the sheriff's office these days, but that's not from her. But people in politics tell me that he's not going to run. So I don't know.
Why would he? It's a pretty hard job. And he's got a lot of work that he's been doing in the sheriff's office.
Well, I think he likes the sheriff's office.
I think so too.
And but I don't know. I'm not. But that's the word on the street is that he's not running. So. As always, it's a matter of who's going to run, and I think that Mayor Emanuel is beatable, but you got to have somebody that can beat him. Now, can Chuy beat him? I don't know. I think that might be, our society. We're always looking for the fresh thing, and Chuy is.
What about Lori Lightfoot?
Lori Lightfoot. I don't know that she's of a mind to run for mayor, but she's a formidable person.
Yeah,
from my understanding. So there may be
Could Ron be so vulnerable?
There's people talking her up for U.S. attorney.
Right.
So
I've heard that too.
There's a lot of things like that that could intervene.
Could Ron be so vulnerable on, say, police accountability that a Kurt Summers would step up?
I don't think a Kurt Summers would have the nerve to take on a Rahm Emanuel and possibly short-circuit his young political career.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't know. I think you could. I think that Emanuel is beatable, and if you get him to a runoff, I think he can be beaten. So I think any number of people. I believe. Cook County Commissioner Bridget Gaynor kind of wants her name out there. Whether or not she has the nerve to do it, I don't know. There's a lot, but there don't seem to be a lot of big people, in a rush to raise their hands.
Yeah. The role of media came into came under fire in this last national election. And of course, people every day are saying, why aren't, when someone gets a chance to interview the new president, why do they not nail him every time he tells a fib, which seems to be whenever his lips are moving? What do you think about the media and its position right now as far as, do people even go to the media? Do you have a sense of whether or not people are using it as much, less, or are they just tearing their hair out and drinking a lot out there in America?
No, I think people are consuming more news media than ever before, and whether they believe everything they read, maybe not, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, challenging what you read, challenging what you think. I saw this. I did not see the David Muir interview with Trump the other day.
Yeah, I didn't.
But I read the transcript. I thought he did a brilliant job of interviewing Trump and sort of calling out his inconsistencies without making it an argument. I mean, if the debates had been conducted that well,
yeah,
I think you would have seen a lot less, controversy over how the media handle it. I mean, unfortunately, the people that are most questioning the media are from the opposite, I believe, point of political view of you folks. They're the ones who say, we're all crooked because they think we're all liberals. Well, we mostly are. But, we're not all that liberal. We're not liberal enough for you, right?
We used to be radicals.
Well, I think part of the problem is that a lot of journalists pay attention to facts, which makes them liberal compared to #AltFacts point of view of the world, which seems to be about a third of the population like to make up their own facts. And that's their worldview. And it's very hard to dialogue, which has been my goal, one-on-one meetings, listening, hearing where people's angst are. I want to understand their pain. I hope someday they'll understand my pain as a white guy, trying to be sensitive to all these other pains in the world. But it's going to be a while before we have that kind of dialogue because they are dealing with a different mindset and set of facts.
Well, there was somebody did a story. Maybe it was the New York Times. Maybe it was the Washington Post. They took the photos of the Trump inauguration and the crowds and put it in front of everybody. And even with the clear visual evidence that, the Trump crowd was smaller than the Obama crowd, 1 in 7 people still looked at that and said that the Trump crowd was bigger. Which it just shows you, yes, we have a disconnect in this guy. And honestly, I find that the most worrisome of all, that we just can't even sort of agree on what we see in front of us.
What the facts are. Right.
So I want to come back to another local issue that you've covered very intensively over the years, and that's homelessness and related issues, supportive housing. And a lot of that's been in Uptown because of the nature of Uptown, although you covered a Lakeview campaign for a while, and you certainly looked at the state budget through that prism as well. Now that you're in the neighborhood, close to the Lakeshore Drive tent city and all that, isn't it amazing to see the shift in just looking at the TIF prism? You have Helen Schiller doing a Target mixed development that it has all sorts of affordable and senior housing, and you have Kappelman doing $14 million in luxury high-rise apartments. Is this where we've come under this mayor and this approach to reviving the city? We use our remaining public resources for the rich instead of those most needy?
Well,
kind of a setup, isn't it, Tom?
Wow,
which part do you want him to answer?
That was loaded enough, huh? I don't really understand why TIF is going into that project. It just seems to me like a slam dunk at that location that you would make money. So I don't really, I don't really understand that. I feel like I'm sort of late to the game on that, and it's, the barn door's open and it's a done deal. So I haven't been writing about that, and I don't really intend to, since it's a little too much of a not in my backyard kind of situation. So
Well, it will be interesting to see what happens around the homeless issue because, like, I know Denver the other day cleared out a homeless camp, and it seems to me a number of cities could be emboldened to follow suit, although a number of big cities seem to be quite supportive of the resistance these days.
Well, I think in Uptown there you got people on both sides of it, but the city is gone slow. They're they're harassing them a little bit with these weekly cleanings under the viaducts, which I think are unnecessary to a point. But overall, they haven't. When I first started writing about this, they would clear them entirely, out of from under the viaducts.
Right.
And then over a period of months, they would slowly creep back in. They're not doing that anymore. So, I think there's a more enlightened attitude at the city about that sort of thing.
Yeah,
but it's still a frustration, to people on the other side of it, I know. They don't bother me. That's what I always tell people. They're not bothering me.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, you may have a question, but I was going to throw it to Mark. I was going to say, of all the things we haven't asked you, what's on your mind that you're working on and you would like to share?
Well, I'm mostly this whole immigration picture is really what's on my mind as I came in here today. I just don't know where we're headed on this, and now yesterday the president threw the refugees into this, and to me the refugee program is just the best of what we do as Americans. Welcome people into our country who have
who need.
And refugees by and large are just special additions to our country. They work super hard. They're grateful to be here, and the idea that we would have a religious test now, I mean, it's just scary. It's just scary. And unfortunately, I don't know what we're going to be able to do about it for 4 years, except kind of try to educate people to these issues and try to, get our 53% in the right states.
So I want to end with where we started. You and your wife have been city newspaper journalists for most of your professional careers. You raised your family in the suburbs, and in retirement, though both of you are still working, you moved to the north side. What's it like to wake up looking at the lake every morning instead of waiting to jump on the L from the suburbs to get downtown?
Well, it's been a huge improvement in our lives. I'm not saying that that I don't have any regrets about having been in the suburbs, but we just feel, well, of course, the lake itself, which we do have a small view of, is a great cure-all for everything. You see, I just find it spiritual, the lake. But we try to get out on and walk the lakefront as much as we can, pretty much every day during when the days are long, and every weekend now. Mm-hmm. And I feel much better connected to the city, and to the people in the neighborhood up there, which it's a crazy little neighborhood, right?
We're glad you're in the neighborhood, and now we can get you on more often.
Well, that's good. That's good. And I can roll out of bed like I had to this morning when I forgot to be here.
All right.
Mark Brown of the Chicago Sun-Times, thanks so much for joining us. You're listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7 FM.